It was about 1973, and I just started to take my undergraduate studies seriously. And there was a meeting, my department, psychology department at Indiana of Bloomington, and about going to graduate school. So I go. Well, apparently the real reason for this meeting was to try to convince people that were thinking about graduate school to not do it. Um, if you wanted an upper middle class income, secure job, this was not the best choice to make. Things were getting much more competitive. You'd have a hard life. You'd spend 5 more years in penury than any of your friends. So you should only do it if you're so into this stuff you couldn't hardly think about anything else. Well, I had my doubts, but not so much that it didn't dawn on me over the next year that maybe that is what I wanted to do. A year later, I was hitchhiking to California carrying, among other things, a briefcase full of books I didn't think I could do without on a 2,000-mile hitchhike from Indiana to California. So something was obviously wrong with this dude. Well, I get to California and I managed to land a job working for Brentano's West Coast warehouse. I was the assistant there for a while, covering with the West Coast manager when he went in the bathroom about 3 or 4 times a day and got stoned. He got fired, so I got the manager job. Well, big deal, right? I got a raise, and my boss was trying to convince me that my next step up would be a store manager, and then moving up in the Brentano's hierarchy and ending up, working for Brentano's corporate in New York. That I had great promise. Well, here's what they say about identity crises. You only just experience it and describe it immediately as a crisis. There's research on this. You interview people 10 years later about the crisis, and it's like, it wasn't a crisis, it was inevitable. Well, my father was a campus minister. He was always an admirer of faculty and graduate students. And I lived on university campuses in Chicago, Madison, Wisconsin, and then West Lafayette High School, where all of my friends were, and many still are, professors' kids. So maybe something was inevitable here. Well, am I going to be a suit in New York for Brentano's? No, I parachute out, start applying to graduate schools, get to Penn, which accepts me for God knows what reason. But then finally, one of my top 2 choices was one of my quirky ones of Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, where I decided to go. Shit, it was in Massachusetts. My childhood dream of being an MIT nuclear particle physicist. Well, okay, it wasn't MIT, it wasn't nuclear particle physics, it was psychology, but it was in Massachusetts, for God's sake. Well, Worcester was a shithole, but the Clark mystique and yet another romantic crash and burn kept me focused enough that I actually finished up my doctorate in 1980 and actually was the only student in my PhD class to get a tenure track job at Penn State in Harrisburg. Not that great of a job, but a tenure track job. Well, so far so good. I published a couple things, but my empirical program wasn't taking off. I had a couple of articles that had been rejected, were sent in for resubmission. My dissertation research I'd revised 3 or 4 times and finally just stuck in a box and put under my desk. Wrote a couple of other little articles, got another project going, but it didn't collect any data yet, so things weren't looking all that great. I got married, very hopeful, except probably the worst decision of my life, since my best man tried to pull out at the last minute, and on the morning of my wedding day told me he'd drive the getaway car that I should run now, and sadly he was probably right, but never mind. It's 1984, it's just before my first anniversary. I'm just starting to think maybe it was not a good idea, but I go to this conference at MIT, Massachusetts again. Oh my God. It's a joint conference of the Cognitive Science Society and the Society for Philosophy and Psychology. It blows me away. I meet Michael Gazzaniga, the split brain dude. I meet Noam Chomsky, the psycholinguist. I meet Doug Hofstadter. I have pizza with Douglas Hofstadter, the Gödel, Escher, and Bach dude. But my research isn't going that great, and this is like a big pond. I'm like a deformed newt in this big pond. It's so weird. But on the way home to celebrate my first anniversary with my wife and future first divorced wife, I visit some friends. One of them's a soft money researcher at Yale. That means he doesn't have an actual academic job, but he's getting money to do research on vision. An old girlfriend who's now getting lots of money doing commercial research on in vitro fertilization. She's got this great place on Long Island Sound, and we have dinner there. Before dinner, we have a couple of drinks. We're out on her deck, looking over the sound, smelling the salt air, and I'm running on about this friend of mine from F&M that left his job to take a job doing eyewitness consulting and now is wearing tailored suits and getting paid lots of money. And I'm talking on and on and on until my friend Jim just says to me, as a good friend often will, "John, you are so full of shit." And he puts his hand on my shoulder. I mean, I'm almost verklempt at this point. He puts his hand on my shoulder, pause, and says, "Kid, you've got a great job. You love what you're doing. You've got research that's in the hopper. It'll come through. It's a little bit difficult, so you're going to pussy out right now. Dude, if you give up now, you'll never be as happy again for the rest of your life. So buck up and do it." And my doubts literally lift off my shoulders. And I give a toast to these guys, and my doubts are just gone. So 6 years later, after getting denied tenure at Penn State, I'm at E-Town, I get tenure, and I'm home without a doubt. This is the place I belong. 30 years later, I'm retired. I was a professor for 37 years, and I can still go to a local winery that's 3 minutes from where I live, raise a glass of wine at Grandview Winery. It's not an advertisement. Look out over this semi-Tuscan valley and go, I still live in paradise, without a doubt.